Gen Z in a nutshell.
We opened this one with the RGZ participating in an athletic meet that almost immediately got turned on its head by the arrival of their sort of kind of predecessors. So these robot girls preceded our current series, having gotten a short pilot film back in 2011 that likely acted as a proof of concept that Toei used to convince Dynamic Planning, or more specifically the original mangaka of the Mazinger, Nagai, to work with them. Yeah, while Toei animated his works, he wisely maintained the license on everything he at least had some part in creating.
Well, all except for one, which was also likely part of the reason why they needed to convince Nagai to work with them.
Alright, so a little history. Starting in 1976, Toei was getting tired of paying royalties to Nagai for adapting the characters and mechs from his works, so they tried to do their own thing, resulting in the lineup that Team T or Team Toei was based on. Magne Robo Gakkin, Balatak, and Vanguard Ace were all created without the involvement of Nagai. And for a while, people kind of believed the same held for Dynamech Gaiking, even though it clearly had a lot of Nagai's usual hallmarks in its design and characters.
It's just a coincidence.
And sure enough, the original idea and concepts for the series were thought up by Nagai, but they decided to go behind his back and not credit him to avoid those aforementioned royalties, which the mangaka rightfully sued their asses over.
Gee, Toei being sketchy, if not outright scummy business practices that led to a falling out with Big Robot franchise. Who could imagine such? Isn't that right, Optimus? I mean, Jinrai, because you're a totally different character, right?
But yeah, it seems like Nagai and Toei eventually settled things at some point, and Gaiking is now fully under Toei's umbrella. Don't worry though, I'm sure Nagai got a nice settlement out of it, and as a bit of karma, pretty much no one remembers these other non-Nagai giant robot shows, to the point that they've never even appeared in Super Robot Wars. Though, I have heard a little demand for Vanguard Ace, as that was made by another mangaka legend, Leiji Matsumoto, RIP by the way. That's probably why they also included this Galaxy Express 3.9 reference in the background. But yeah, we bring this all up because the two robot girl teams ended up competing against each other to possibly represent the real-life beef between Nagai and Toei, in particular Zetchan and Gaichan, which yeah, is just kind of all sorts of meta. Meanwhile, the Underground Empire also tried to enter to take down the RGZ, but they first needed to get some entry tickets with the purchase of an item in the shopping arcade to join the main marathon event.
Sponsored by Ubisoft.
The race began, and not too surprisingly, both of our asshole protagonist teams decided to cheat with Gakkin and Grenda busting out their respective source material's main vehicles. This resulted in a pretty cool action sequence where both sides tried to shoot down the other. In the end, Gakkin and Grenda were taken out of the race, but Gaichan took advantage thanks to her built-in wings and, well...
If you want, you could borrow mine.
Also, was that jab against Doki Doki? Come on, that was a good show, and also, y'all should really appreciate these numbers while you still have them. Zetchan managed to catch up thanks to her Jet Scrounder, which was the Mazinger Z's main means of flight, which you'd think she'd bust out a little sooner, but I guess she was too distracted by the power of the spiral. The two ended up neck and neck in the final stretch of the race as they passed by the not fully rendered background characters, again sponsored by Ubisoft. They tried to win by using their respective projectile fist attacks, which I don't think should count, but not that it really mattered, as they both just kind of exploded. As a result, all of the participants were KO'd, or rightfully disqualified like in the case of the robot girls. The only active participant left was Baron Astra, who managed to enter at the last minute, and thus won by default. Well, at least the true main heroine of the show won out in the end. Still, the robot girls tried to end things on good terms, but I guess they also decided to recreate how Toei and Nagai's court hearings actually went. The second segment opened with the RG enjoying some takoyaki before being joined by seemingly another Mazinger. This was Minerva X, who in Mazinger Z was a mech designed to specifically be the title mech's partner, which this version also tried to immediately become. Though it's also worth mentioning that the original mech was controlled by an AI that was madly in love with the Mazinger, to the point that she could be a tad two-faced.
Dika Pink became a bit of a bitch after she left SPD.
But yeah, Gretchen was rightfully suspicious of the new Majinker while they were working at the gas pumps, as Minerva clearly tried to separate Zetchan from the rest of her team. And through the usage of some crocodile tears, it worked and they went to the back room together. And sure enough, the Underground Empire were behind all of this, as much like the original Minerva X, whose blueprints were stolen by Dr. Hell, this version was also a double agent. And with Zetchan alone, it was time to strike in a way that's making that yellow dollar sign approach ever closer. And yet still, Minerva decided to unleash the ultimate trap.
And hey, you ever notice how this show is basically gender bending all of the super robots that are very male coded? Well, what would they do with a more female coded robot?
Yeah, not gonna lie, this is a pretty brilliant twist, as again, this character's VA is mostly associated with Dekapig and Katsuki, so there was no reason to think he'd turn out to be a femboy, but then you remember what this whole show's premise was, and suddenly it all just makes sense. And of course, just the dark humor of Zetchan almost doing it with someone after a disturbing gender reveal is the kind of stuff I just eat up, along with this.
This spin-off to Ori Emo is going kind of off the rails.
But yeah, and even though she tried to resolve things the same way she did with Ball Talk in the previous segment, this is actually a good showing for Gretchen, as she defended Zetchan even after she dismissed her earlier concerns and treated her like she was in the wrong. In turn, Zetchan took a rocket punch for her, which made Minerva realize that she wasn't suited to be by her side.
Honestly, this is probably one of the better segments of the show, as it was one of the rare times where the RGZ showed that they're not total jerk-offs, as they at least do care about each other.
Not that they weren't still kind of villainous, like when Grenda found out this is all the doing of the Empire and gave them the appropriate punishment. Oh, and also Minerva just came back the next day because he didn't learn a single thing.
So, is this kind of stuff out of date or too modern? Because I really can't tell at this point.
The final segment took place at a hot springs inn where the RTZ were trying to relax until the sounds of a siren went off, and yes, I do mean as the thing that makes the loud noises, and not the fish ladies, even though this character's name was Lorelei. But yeah, this character was Yoko Lorelei, which wasn't a mech in Mazinger Z, but the idol group she was a part of, Rhine X1, was. Meanwhile, Lorelei Heinrich was the name of an android girl who directly controlled the mech. And why exactly did they feel the need to make references to both the mech and its pilot in spite of not really doing that for everyone else in the show?
I don't know.
Also, fun fact, the Shin version of the character was voiced by Saki Fujita, so yeah, the singing android girl had the voice of Hatsune Miku, meanwhile this version
is what happens when you let Total Dupe create a Vocaloid song.
But yeah, her idol group had long since disbanded for reasons, and yet she still managed to maintain some very niche fans like Grenda. Later that night, Dean figured that she'd be able to put on a good performance for everyone. I'm guessing they didn't hear or see her destroying the hot springs. Though, thankfully, she was interrupted by the arrival of the Underground Empire and a new Beast Girl. And while Belgus V5 did use supersonic attacks, it wasn't exactly a singing robot, though thankfully this version did have a very talented singer behind it. I mean, she did sing 1/4 of Conditions of Being a Princess. And sure enough, she managed to sing a hell of a catchy folk song that had some unique properties to it.
I wonder if Diddy's songs had the same effect on people.
Regardless, it was clear that everyone was enjoying her song, at least in some ways, and thus Lorelei believed that there was no demand or stage that she could perform on. However, Grenda's very niche taste prevented her from being affected, and thus it allowed her to snap her idol off her depression with a bright slap or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, and most of them were actually punches. Again, you just gotta love it when the show has no restraints. But yeah, she somehow gave her the confidence to sing again by reminding her that her songs had a soul to them, which I guess is one way of putting that. And thus, they had a truly epic song battle, just like Ryuko versus Jakusure, you know, minus the Beethoven, and actually good singing by Shoko Nakagawa, as Grenda joined in on it, and well...
my constipation cleared up. Excuse me.
And after defeating Belgus and her multiple layers of makeup, as well as destroying half the country by making a few volcanoes erupt, somehow the episode ended with them forming a viral idol unit.
Well, this is the platform where pretty much any idiot with a microphone can become pretty popular somehow. Still, this was probably my favorite episode this entire series.
I mean, honestly, I think every episode of this series is pretty great, but for me, this one just had the most character to it, with everyone either getting over their hilarious personalities or showing some actual depth to them. Now, for a series like this, character development is clearly the last thing anyone is looking for, which is fine, as this is supposed to be a fun parody of Toei Super Robot anime of the past. And yet, for the second and third segments, we actually got to see different sides to all three of the RGZ. Zetchan and Gretchan had genuinely heartwarming moments when they tried to protect each other from the dangerous trap, and Grenda showed that she had interests besides sadism, that while certainly an acquired taste, did show that she was incredibly passionate about her favorite idol group. That said, I did have the most fun with the first segment with Team T. Like, even if they weren't trying to make reference to Nagai and Toei's rocky past, this does still end up working as a great commentary on how Toei tried to do their own Super Robot shows with mixed results that would eventually lead them to working together again in spite of their past tensions. With that context, it does make the segment a lot funnier, even though the insanity of the superpowered girls competing with their fists of destruction more than covered the comedy quota. And overall, this is just a really good episode with some explosively hilarious comedy and even some kind of heartwarming moments. And hey, whatever the next Precure season turns out to be, I think we can all agree they have some very stiff competition.
Thank you for watching, and hey, Happy New Year!
For this year, we are going to try some new stuff, like of course reviewing shows like this that aren't exactly magical girl stuff, and maybe even a few more commentaries and lists, which we actually have a lot of ideas and plans for.
Look forward to a whole new year of stuff. And until then, though, for now, my friends, and
It's a trap!
yeah, dude, you're kind of late on that punchline.